My name is Lucy, and I'm 29 years old. I've always been a dedicated and hardworking woman. I've spent the last few years building my career in the marketing field, and I've always thought of myself as independent, someone who could take on whatever life threw my way. I'm married to Ethan, who's 32. We've been together for 3 years, and while I love him, there are times when I feel like we're not on the same page. We've talked about having children before, but lately, the subject has been weighing heavily on my mind, and I feel like we're stuck in a never-ending cycle of back and forth. Ethan is an ambitious man, driven by his career goals, much like me. He's always been focused on saving money, buying a house, and ensuring our future before adding more to our family. I understand the logic behind his reasoning, but lately, I've been feeling an intense desire to start a family. We've been renting a small apartment for the last couple of years, and it's fine, but it doesn't feel like our forever home. I've always dreamed of being a mother, but whenever I bring it up, Ethan quickly shuts it down. "We'll get there when we're ready," he says, but the more time that passes, the more frustrated I feel. It's as though my desire for children isn't being taken seriously, and it's starting to eat away at me. We've spent the last few months living in this tension. We both work long hours, barely seeing each other during the week, and when we do spend time together, the topic of children is always avoided. One night, over dinner, I brought it up again, hoping Ethan might see things differently. "I know we've talked about this before, but I feel like we're running out of time. I want to have a baby soon," I said, my voice trembling slightly. Ethan looked up from his plate, his expression unchanged. "We're not ready for that yet. We need a bigger house, Lucy. You know that." His words were calm, but they hit me hard. He didn't even seem to consider how I felt, just repeating the same thing over and over. It wasn't just Ethan who was making things difficult. His parents, who live nearby, have been asking us every time we visit them when we're going to have children. They don't seem to understand why we're waiting, and their questions have started to feel like pressure. "It's been a year since you two got married," his mother would say with a smile. "When are we going to hear the good news?" Ethan would stay quiet, his eyes on the ground, as though hoping the conversation would just pass by. I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted him to stand up for us, to defend our choices. But he never did. The pressure from his parents, combined with Ethan's refusal to even discuss having children, began to feel suffocating. One evening, his mother even pulled me aside, saying, "Lucy, don't you want to be a real wife? Maybe it's time you quit that job and focus on starting a family." Her words felt like a slap across my face. I've always been proud of my career, and the idea of giving it up just to fit into some ideal of womanhood didn't sit well with me. It was always Ethan who encouraged me to work and pursue my ambitions. But now, it felt as though his family was telling me I wasn't good enough unless I was barefoot and pregnant. I snapped. "If you're so concerned about us having a baby, why don't you talk to your son instead of blaming me for everything?" My voice was louder than I meant it to be, but I couldn't hold it in any longer. I stood up from the table and walked out, feeling a wave of anger rush over me. I wanted to scream at Ethan, to tell him that this wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about me wanting to start a family, to share a life with him. But he just didn't get it. Outside, I found Ethan smoking by the door as if nothing had happened. I couldn't understand how he could be so calm after everything. "Are we leaving now?" he asked, his voice casual. I didn't even know how to respond. My frustration was at its breaking point. I climbed into the car without saying a word. It was clear to me that Ethan wasn't listening, and I had had enough. "I'm not going to your parents' house anymore," I said firmly. Ethan looked at me, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "What do you mean? We save money by eating there. And besides, you want a house and kids, right?" His words were like a dagger to my heart. He wasn't hearing me, and it seemed as though all he cared about was the house. I felt like a failure, trapped in a situation where my voice didn't matter. "If saving money is so important," I continued, Why don't you cut back on your drinking with friends or smoking? Why don't you make sacrifices instead of just blaming me for everything? His response was as dismissive as always. It's not a big deal, he said, but to me it was. It is a big deal, Ethan, I snapped, the tears threatening to spill over. I can't keep doing this. If you want to save money, then you need to make changes too. You can't expect me to carry the entire load. That night, things between us reached a boiling point. I was so tired of being the one to compromise, to follow the rules while he continued to live as though nothing had changed. I wanted a family, but it felt like Ethan didn't care about my feelings anymore. We had talked about this for so long, but his solution was always the same. Wait until we have a house. Then, something unexpected happened that changed everything. My uncle, who had been living in a luxurious mansion on a large piece of land, passed away. Ethan and I were never particularly close with my uncle, but the news of his death stirred something in me. A few days later, I learned that my uncle had left me his inheritance, property, land, and a substantial amount of money. Ethan didn't understand why I was so focused on this inheritance. To him, it was just another way to get what he wanted: money to build a house. When I received the news, I decided to meet with the lawyer to discuss the details. I didn't want Ethan involved in this. It was something personal for me, and I didn't need his opinion on how I should use it. When I politely asked him to leave the room during the meeting, he didn't seem to take it well, but I didn't care. I needed to think clearly and make decisions that were right for me. That meeting, though, made me reflect on everything. Ethan's behavior, the constant pressure to wait for a house, his refusal to compromise, and his assumptions about money, had worn me down. It felt like he was only interested in my uncle's inheritance because it could help him achieve his goal of building a house. It was frustrating, but it also made me realize that I had been putting my own needs aside for too long. A few months later, Ethan surprised me with an unexpected visit to a new house. We drove to a residential area, and I was confused when he parked in front of a house I didn't recognize. His parents greeted us at the door, and that's when things took an even stranger turn. This wasn't their house. It was a new place that Ethan had secretly bought, and he expected us to move in together. "This is our new home," he said casually, as if I should be excited. "We'll live here, and you can work things out with my parents on the baby issue." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He hadn't even consulted me about this decision. He just went ahead and bought a house without discussing it with me. I felt completely betrayed. I had already told him I didn't want to visit his parents anymore, let alone live with them, but Ethan didn't seem to care. He was so focused on his plan, so convinced that this was the best course of action, that he hadn't even considered how I felt. I was speechless, and the anger bubbled up inside of me. "You bought this house without asking me first?" I asked, feeling a mix of disbelief and frustration. "And now you want me to live here with your parents?" Ethan shrugged as though it was no big deal. "You want kids, don't you? This is the solution," he said, his voice completely calm. But to me, it wasn't a solution. It was a control tactic. The conversation only got worse. Ethan assumed I would use my inheritance to pay him back for the house. "The house is expensive, but it'll all work out if you just use the inheritance money," he said, completely ignoring the fact that the inheritance wasn't just mine to spend however I wanted. When I rejected his suggestion, Ethan became angry, and in that moment, I realized that our marriage was beyond repair. He handed me a pre-filled divorce form, his name already written on it. "If you don't want to live with my parents, then let's just get a divorce," he said coldly. I didn't even hesitate. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "If that's the way it has to be, then I'll sign the papers." I left. I packed my things and filed for divorce. I had finally realized that I couldn't keep living in this controlling, suffocating relationship. I needed to take control of my own life. For the first time, I felt free.